The guitar case hits the concrete, and in that single moment, everything Toby Keith has spent 30 years building is about to be tested in the most humiliating way possible. He's standing outside a hotel in downtown America, still sweating from a show where 15,000 people just screamed his name for 2 straight hours, and he's being told he can't walk into the bar of his own hotel, not because it's full, not because there's a private event, but because of a sign taped to the glass that reads, "Tonight only, left-leaning guests exclusively." The security guard won't look him in the eye. This kid, maybe 23 years old, is holding his ground, but you can see he knows this is wrong. Toby doesn't argue, doesn't pull the "do you know who I am" card. He just stares at that sign for 10 seconds that feel like 10 minutes, then turns around and walks straight back through the lobby. His tour manager is calling after him, asking what happened, but Toby's not answering. He's already decided what he's going to do, and it's going to make this hotel wish they never put that sign up in the first place. 5 minutes later, he's back outside, not going to his room, not leaving. He sits down on the curb directly in front of the main entrance, opens his guitar case on the filthy sidewalk, and pulls out the acoustic that's been with him since before he was famous. No stage, no microphone, no announcement. Oh, he just starts playing right there on the street, and the first person who stops to watch has no idea they're about to witness something that's going to shut down 6 city blocks and force this hotel to answer a question nobody wants to ask out loud. When did we decide that what you believe determines whether you deserve basic human dignity? The first song is something most people don't expect. It's not courtesy of the red, white, and blue. Not one of his jingoistic anthems that critics love to hate. It's quieter, more personal, a deep cut from an album most casual fans never heard. The lyrics talk about sitting at a diner counter next to someone you disagree with, sharing coffee, finding common ground in the fact that you're both just trying to make it through the day. And the thing is, it works. People stop, not because they recognize him at first, but because there's something magnetic about a man sitting on a curb with a guitar, playing like he's got nothing to lose and everything to prove. Within minutes, there's 20 people watching, then 50. A couple walking their dog, a group of college kids coming out of a bar 3 doors down. An older woman who was waiting for an Uber stops and cancels the ride because she wants to hear what happens next. Then 100 people. Then the sidewalk's packed and people are standing in the street and cars are honking because they can't get through. Toby's playing songs about freedom, about disagreement, about how this country was built on the idea that you don't have to like your neighbor to defend his right to exist. And the crowd isn't just his fans. There's people in Antifa shirts standing next to guys in military jackets. College kids with pink hair next to construction workers still covered in dust from the job site. Nobody's fighting. Nobody's yelling. They're all just standing there, watching one of the most famous voices in American music play for free on a curb, because he got rejected from a bar that's supposed to serve everyone. But here's where it gets interesting. About 20 minutes into this impromptu concert, a man in the crowd recognizes what's happening, and it clicks for him in a way that makes his blood run cold. He's a local journalist, works for an alternative weekly, leans pretty far left on most issues, and he's actually supposed to be inside that bar right now, covering the political event. That's the reason for the sign. He was running late, stopped to see what the commotion was about, and now he's standing here realizing that the story he came to write just became irrelevant, because the real story is happening out here. He pulls out his phone and starts live streaming, and within seconds the comments are pouring in. People from across the country asking if this is real, if that's actually Toby Keith, if that sign really exists. And the journalist, to his credit, confirms it all, shows the sign, shows the crowd, shows Toby sitting on that curb like he's got all night and nowhere better to be. The hotel security guard is losing his mind. He's radioing his supervisor, who's radioing the manager, who's probably on the phone with the owner, and nobody knows what to do because this situation isn't in any manual they've ever read. You can't arrest a guy for playing guitar on a public sidewalk. You can't disperse a crowd that's being completely peaceful. And you sure as hell can't physically remove Toby Keith without creating the kind of PR nightmare that ends careers and closes businesses. So they watch, and they wait, and they hope it just goes away. But it doesn't go away, it gets bigger. The crowd's at 200 now, maybe 300. Traffic's completely stopped on the street. Police show up, but they're not there to break things up. They're there to manage the situation, to keep people from spilling into traffic lanes, to make sure nobody gets hurt. And even the cops seem conflicted, because half of them probably voted for the politicians who support what Toby represents, and the other half are just trying to do their jobs without this turning into some kind of political incident. One officer, an older guy with sergeant stripes, walks over to Toby during a break between songs and asks him quietly if he's trying to start something. And Toby looks at him with this expression that's half amusement and half genuine confusion and says, "I'm just playing music, officer. Is that illegal now?" The sergeant doesn't have an answer for that, so he just nods and walks back to his position, and Toby starts the next song. Inside the bar, the political event is still happening, but it's losing steam fast. The organizers planned for maybe 60-70 people max. They've got speeches prepared, a local city council candidate ready to announce her campaign, a whole agenda built around the idea of creating progressive community spaces. But the speeches are being drowned out by the music coming from outside, and people keep leaving to see what's happening. And the ones who stay are getting increasingly uncomfortable because they're starting to realize how bad this looks. You're inside the exclusive event talking about inclusion, while outside there's a massive diverse crowd gathered around the guy you just excluded. The cognitive dissonance is breaking people's brains. Then something unexpected happens that changes the entire energy of the night. A veteran older guy, probably early 60s, wearing a jacket covered in military patches, pushes his way through the crowd until he's standing right in front of Toby. For a second, everyone tenses up because this could go badly. This could be the moment where someone angry confronts Toby about his politics, about his support for the Iraq War, about all the controversial stances he's taken over the years. But instead, the veteran just stands there until Toby finishes the song, and then he speaks, and his voice carries in the sudden silence. "I was in Kandahar in 2008, the veteran says. "You came and played for us. Middle of December, cold as hell, and you stayed for 6 hours. Took pictures with every single soldier who wanted one. My buddy Jimmy, he got killed 3 weeks later, and the last good memory he had was singing American Soldier with you at 2 in the morning in a mess tent that smelled like diesel fuel and fear. I don't care what your politics are. I don't care who you voted for. You showed up when it mattered, and that's more than most people ever do." The veteran's voice cracks on that last sentence, and he's clearly fighting to hold it together. And Toby stands up from the curb for the first time since this whole thing started. He sets his guitar down gently, and he walks over and he hugs this man, and the crowd is dead silent except for the sound of a few people crying, because this moment is so raw and real that it cuts through all the political bullshit and reminds everyone watching why they're actually here. This isn't about left or right. It's about the fact that we've created a culture where a man who entertained troops in war zones, who brought comfort to soldiers who were about to die, is being told he's not good enough to drink a beer in a hotel bar because his politics don't match the right checklist. The journalist who's been streaming this whole thing is watching his viewer count climb into the tens of thousands. The comment section is a war zone of opinions, but the overwhelming sentiment is shock. People can't believe this is happening in America. Both sides are having their own private reckonings in real time. Conservatives are furious about the exclusion, feeling vindicated in their belief that the left has become authoritarian. But here's what's more interesting. A significant number of progressives in the comments are equally appalled. They're pointing out that this isn't what they signed up for, that this kind of gatekeeping is exactly the opposite of the inclusive society they're trying to build. Some are drawing comparisons to the kind of discrimination their parents and grandparents fought against, and they're not comfortable with the parallel. Inside the bar, one of the event organizers, a woman named Rebecca who's been a community activist for 15 years, steps away from the speeches and walks over to the window. She can see the crowd outside, can see Toby Keith sitting back down and picking up his guitar again, and she feels something twist in her stomach. She's the one who suggested the sign. She's the one who argued that it was important to create a safe space, to make a statement about whose values are welcome in their community. But watching this unfold, seeing the crowd that's gathered, seeing the diversity of the people who are standing together listening to this music, she's starting to question whether she's made a terrible mistake. Toby starts playing again, and this time he chooses a song that nobody expects. It's a cover, something from the 70s, a folk song about soldiers coming home from Vietnam and being spit on by protesters who couldn't separate the war from the warriors. He changes some of the words, modernizes it, makes it about the current moment, about how we've gotten so good at hating each other that we've forgotten how to see each other. And the crowd is swaying now, arms around strangers' shoulders. People from completely different worlds connected by this shared experience of watching something honest happen in a culture that feels increasingly fake. That's when the door to the hotel bar finally opens and Rebecca steps out. She's got her phone in her hand, already recording, and everyone in the crowd recognizes what's about to happen. This is the confrontation everyone's been waiting for. The activist versus the patriot. The progressive versus the conservative. The culture war distilled down to two people standing on a sidewalk, while hundreds watch and thousands more stream it live. Rebecca is prepared. She's been in these situations before. She's debated on panels, been interviewed on news programs, written op-eds that got shared thousands of times. She knows her talking points. She knows how to frame this. She approaches Toby and her voice is steady, confident, maybe a little aggressive. "You're weaponizing your celebrity to undermine a legitimate political gathering," she says. "We have the right to create spaces for our community, to set boundaries about who participates in our events. What you're doing here is harassment, it's intimidation, and it's exactly the kind of behavior we were trying to avoid by creating a space exclusively for people who share our values." Toby lets her finish, doesn't interrupt, doesn't shake his head, doesn't give the crowd any reaction to latch onto. He just listens, and when she's done, he sets his guitar down again and stands up. The height difference is notable. He's a big guy, and she's maybe 5'4", but the physical dynamic doesn't matter, because what's about to happen isn't about intimidation. It's about clarity. "Can I ask you something?" Toby says, and his voice is so calm it's almost gentle. "Do you really believe that freedom of speech means only the people who agree with you get to speak?" Rebecca tries to pivot immediately. "This isn't about free speech. This is about creating boundaries, about protecting vulnerable people from rhetoric that causes harm." She's back in her comfort zone now, using the language of social justice, of protection and safety and harm reduction. But Toby doesn't let her retreat into abstractions. The sign doesn't say no hate speech, and he points out, it doesn't say no harassment or no violence. It says left-leaning guests exclusively. That's not protecting anybody from harm. That's just saying that people who think differently than you aren't welcome. And I'm trying to understand how that's different from any other kind of discrimination you claim to oppose. The silence that follows is devastating. Rebecca opens her mouth to respond, closes it, opens it again. She's been in tough debates before, but this is different because Toby isn't being aggressive or dismissive. He's being genuinely curious, asking a question that she realizes she doesn't have a good answer for. The crowd is watching this exchange like it's a tennis match, heads turning back and forth, but they're not cheering for either side. They're just waiting to see what happens next. "It's not the same," Rebecca finally says, but her voice has lost some of its certainty. "We're not discriminating against an immutable characteristic. Political beliefs are choices, and choices have consequences." Toby nods slowly, like he's considering this. "So if I owned a business and I put up a sign that said conservatives only, you'd be fine with that, because political beliefs are choices?" "That's different," Rebecca says immediately, but she can hear how weak it sounds even as the words leave her mouth. "How?" Toby asks. "Explain to me how it's different." And she can't. She starts talking about punching up versus punching down, about power dynamics and historical context, but it's all falling apart because the core principle she's defending is indefensible and everyone watching knows it. You can't argue for exclusion based on thought and belief without opening the door to the exact kind of discrimination you claim to fight against. The crowd isn't hostile to her, but they're not on her side either. Even the people who probably agree with her politics are shifting uncomfortably because they can see where this is going. Then Toby says something that nobody expects. "I don't think you're a bad person," he says. "I think you probably got into activism because you care about people, because you want to make the world better. But somewhere along the way, you started believing that making the world better means getting rid of the people who disagree with you. And that's not how democracy works. That's not how America works. That's how you build echo chambers and tribal warfare, and a society where nobody trusts anybody who doesn't think exactly like they do. Rebecca's eyes are shining now, and you can't tell if it's anger or something else. You don't get to lecture me about democracy, she says. You've spent your career celebrating war and nationalism and everything that's wrong with this country. Maybe, Toby says, but I've never put up a sign that said you're not welcome. That lands like a physical blow. Rebecca takes a step back, and for a moment it looks like she might start crying, but instead she just turns around and walks back into the hotel. The crowd doesn't boo or cheer. They just watch her go in silence, and then all eyes turn back to Toby. He picks up his guitar, sits back down on the curb, and starts playing again like nothing happened. But something did happen. Everyone who watched that exchange, whether they were there in person or streaming it online, just witnessed a masterclass in how to dismantle someone's logic without destroying their dignity. The story reaches critical mass within the hour. Major news outlets are picking it up. Conservative media is having a field day, calling Toby a free speech hero. But the more interesting response is coming from the left, where a real conversation is starting to happen about whether progressive spaces have gone too far in policing. Who gets to participate? Opinion pieces start dropping from liberal writers who are willing to admit that the sign was wrong, that this kind of exclusion is counterproductive, that if you want to change minds, you have to be willing to engage with the people whose minds need changing. Hotel management finally makes a decision. At around 1 in the morning, nearly 3 hours after this whole thing started, a senior manager comes out and personally removes the sign from the door. He offers Toby a formal apology and invites him inside, says the bar is open to everyone and he's welcome to have anything he wants on the house. The crowd applauds, thinks this is the happy ending, the moment where Toby accepts the apology and everyone goes home. But Toby doesn't go in. He thanks the manager, says he appreciates the gesture, but he's good right where he is. It was never about getting into your bar, he explains. It was about making a point, and I think I've made it. He plays for another 30 minutes, and the crowd stays with him the entire time. And when he finally packs up his guitar and stands up, people are reluctant to leave. They've been part of something real, something that felt like it mattered, and they don't want it to end. Toby shakes hands, takes a few photos, and then he walks back into the hotel and disappears into an elevator, and the street slowly empties out as people drift back to their lives, carrying with them the memory of what they just witnessed. The aftermath unfolds over weeks and months. The video of the confrontation between Toby and Rebecca is watched millions of times. It's analyzed on news programs, discussed in college classrooms, referenced in think pieces about the state of American discourse. Rebecca herself writes an essay about the experience, published in a progressive magazine, where she admits that she was wrong about the sign, but argues that the underlying impulse, the desire to create safe spaces for marginalized communities, was right. She gets torn apart in the comments by people on her own side who feel like she's capitulating to the right. But she also gets messages from people thanking her for being willing to admit she made a mistake, for showing that it's possible to hold firm to your values while still acknowledging when your tactics were flawed. Toby doesn't talk about it much. In one interview a few months later, he mentions it almost in passing, says he spent his whole career playing music for people, and the moment you start deciding who deserves to hear it, you've lost the plot. When the interviewer asks if he thinks the country can come back from this level of division, Toby's surprisingly optimistic. He says he's seen what happens when you get people in the same space and give them a reason to listen to each other. It doesn't solve everything, but it's better than the alternative. Years later, that night becomes a case study in how individual actions can shift cultural narratives. It's taught in communications courses, referenced in books about civil discourse, cited by politicians on both sides when they want to make points about the importance of dialogue. The hotel, ironically, becomes something of a landmark, with tourists occasionally stopping by to take pictures of the spot where Toby sat on the curb. And for the people who were there that night, it remains a touchstone, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in the divisions others are trying to create. Toby Keith's legacy was already secure, built on decades of music that spoke to people who felt invisible to the cultural elite. But that night added something else to it. Proof that standing up for principles doesn't require anger or aggression. Sometimes it just requires a guitar, a sidewalk, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves a seat at the table, even when they're the last person you'd choose to sit next to.